mentor in our network for a long time and is just an incredible resource. So excited to hear what you have to say today.
Okay, so someone had asked me earlier whether or not this was going to be interactive. And so I guess the answer is going to be, I'm going to try and make it interactive because examples would be great. And if you guys sort of go, yeah, here's a situation I've got that I'm trying to figure out sort of how to do better, it would be great if we could sort of actually work through some of those. And so we'll see how we are on time. And I'm just going to kind of probably set, probably one alarm just so I have a sense of where we are on time and don't run too crazy here. Okay, great. All right, so basically this was entitled Storytelling for Founders, but it really is storytelling for founders, for startups in general. And the idea is really to help you understand that stories aren't what people think they are. And so, but before we go, this is sort of like my inside book cover jacket. I figured, this is not going to be about me, so I just want to take one slide, tell you a little bit about me, just so you understand context, where I've been, why I know what I know, and sort of where the information that you're going to hear today is coming from. So I founded or co-founded a bunch of different companies, ranging from the ones that I ran screaming from the building and said, oh my God, I'm lucky I got out with my skin intact, to the one that we bootstrapped to a $100 million business. And so along the ways, I've learned a lot of stuff doing sort of businesses, the ones that weren't. They only had two outcomes. They were not good and bad outcomes. There were only two outcomes. There were the ones where I learned a lot, and then there were the ones where I made a lot. But they're not necessarily the same ones. I've been training and coaching startup founders and CEOs on and off for about the past 20 years. After I went through my first startup, I realized, oh my God, this stuff is really hard. And at the time, there just weren't a lot of resources to learn stuff. The GSVs of the world, sort of the incubators, the accelerators, all that stuff didn't exist back when I started. And so it was one of those things where I thought, I need to kind of go out and try and be one of those resources that I wish I had existed back when I had gotten started. No worries. Among other things, sort of as part of my the way I spend my time, I am part of the selection committee for the Harvard Business School Alumni Angel Group, and so I spend a lot of time reviewing startups in terms of looking at their viability, looking at sort of their founders, looking at sort of how they are as businesses, how investable are they, all of that. And so I bring sort of not only the founder perspective, but really a perspective of how startups are viewed sort of from the outside looking in as well. I've launched the Founders Forge coaching back about a year ago because I realized that sometimes in working with programs like GSVlabs and different accelerators, I would have relationships with different startups, but they would sort of be for shorter terms. And I realized that I really liked working one-on-one with people within startups to sort of go through the entire growth cycle and watch it go from sort of concept all the way to like, ooh, look, wow, we're a big company. And my biggest qualification, I've been telling stories my whole life. But the reality is, man, hate when that happens. Okay, reality is, okay, so, so my goals today are, I want to help you understand three things, really. This isn't about any particular thing like how to do a great pitch or anything like that. This is three things. One is, why is storytelling important at all for founders and for startups? Talk about some specific tactics and things that you can do to tell stories in a better way, in a way that connects better with your audience. And three is to help you avoid sort of the common mistakes that I see all the time when I'm either looking at presentations or I'm going to sort of, investor meetings, or the things that in general I think hurt sometimes the chances that a startup has for finding success. Stories are how we communicate. And I want to sort of get your mind in the right place in terms of what a story is. Seth Godin, who's a big person in marketing, says that, for example, brands are sort of our shortcut to understanding what a company is about. But brands, in a sense, are a story. I mean, when you think about Volvo, you think, oh, that's a really safe car. When you think about Apple computer, you think those really good design. Those are stories that have been crafted. I mean, sort of images of businesses, cultures within businesses, everything that we do, how we dress, what we drive, where we live, that tells somebody a story about us. If you think about sort of FBI, those FBI people that are profilers, they kind of look at you and they go, they can tell a lot about you by the way you carry yourself and all these other things. Sometimes people buy expensive cars because they want to tell the story, I've got money. Sometimes people dress, with all sorts of piercings because they want to tell the story, I'm super independent, I'm not following the regular path that everything is. So everything is a story, and sometimes we don't think about what the story is that we're trying to tell and the message we're trying, and we will even tell a story when we're not trying to. So one of the things today is to understand that you should start to be mindful of the stories that you're telling, understand that everything that you say, every way you communicate is telling somebody something. And sometimes what people lack is the fact that I can manage the narrative, I can lead the narrative, I can get people to feel a certain way, believe a certain way, think a certain way based on how I craft my story. Stories are powerful. Stories persuade, they educate, they inform, they move us, they'll make us feel emotional. In startups, you use stories to recruit. You have to tell people, here's what I'm doing, I got no money, you gotta come work for me for free. But you've gotta tell the story in a way that's gonna be compelling and make somebody go, yeah, I'm in, I'm going for this. Stories motivate, they create interest. Tell me more. When we go to the movies, the stories sort of have a sort of arc and a flow, and they make us feel a certain way. The one thing that real life stories have, that movies have, is a soundtrack. And I've often thought, boy, wouldn't it be great if everything we could do, we had a little soundtrack, so that when you should be afraid, I should play my afraid music, and when you should be excited, I start playing my music. But part of it is that stories can also convey confidence, and it's about the way that you tell a story. One of the things that I see when I see founders in front of a room is, one of the takeaways I get sometimes is, there's a person that I can feel confident in. There's a person that, if I were thinking about working for a particular startup, there's somebody that I could feel would be a good leader. If someone's in business development, it can convey sort of this sense of trust. It can convey a lot of things, and it's all about the words you use, the way that you tell the story, sort of your body language. All of it is part of the story that you're telling, and you need to be mindful of that, because sometimes, for example, when I'm working with people that I'm coaching, there will be people who say things that end like this, and they'll talk all the time in a way that's not quite right, and you can tell that there's sort of a lack of confidence in what they're saying. Everything they say that's supposed to be an assertion sounds like a question. And so little things that you do, or it's the Australian accent. Australians aren't confident. That's all we know, okay?
Australians are dangerously direct.
They're dangerously direct. So the thing is, all of these things you can do with stories. And so it's why it's really important to be mindful when you're telling a story and be mindful how you're telling a story. We're all storytellers. Again, sort of the way we dress, the conversations we have, gossip we tell in the hallways. All of it comes together and it's all important. And founders in particular the really good founders are really good storytellers. I chose this picture of Steve Jobs for a couple of reasons. One is because he is sort of renowned. His brand, Steve Jobs' personal brand, was that he was a guy that could do presentations like nobody's business. But the thing is, and I put this one in particular, the Apple Music event 2001, the first ever iPod introduction. It's on YouTube. If you get a chance, I'd watch it, because this guy is a master storyteller. This was the film. This was the clip of him introducing the iPod for the first time. And what's interesting is, he came out to just tell people, hey, we made a music player that can hold that has 5 gigabits worth of memory and can fit in your pocket and all of this and does these great things. But man, when you watch this video, he told a story. He came out with this thing, it wasn't visible, it was in his pocket when he came out, and he starts telling people about how music is part of everyone's life, and how right now it's hard to sort of get more music to be portable, and how every moment in your life has some sort of music you associate with it, and music costs so much money and all this stuff. And he says, but we have figured out how to get music in your pocket how to get music portable for a really low price. And it's funny because I was watching the Steve Jobs documentary, the movie that they made on him, and they did a version of this presentation. And the only part of the whole presentation that stood out to me was when he stopped and he got really excited and he said, you know what we've done? We've created 1,000 songs. That's your entire library. And he reaches in his pocket. He goes, that'll fit in your pocket. That's how you get someone's emotion involved. If he just come out and said, hey, we got this new shiny thing, and it's got some knobs on it, it's got 5 gigs of memory, and it's fat, it's got a huge battery life, nobody would have given a crap. But he was telling this thing and connecting it with his audience. Here's why this is important to you. And that's one of the things that's really important in telling stories. You need to understand a little bit about who it is you're talking to so you understand what's important to them. Because the biggest mismatch I see a lot is people telling stories to the wrong audience. And I see that in funding all the time, where, and this is just an example. And it's not that they're telling the story to the wrong audience, they're telling it in the wrong way. So I see a lot of founders right now that are doing feminine products for a variety of reasons, and what they'll do is they'll come in and they're giving a presentation to a panel of 5 male investors. And one of the things is they present it with all the stuff that they know in their head, but they forget this audience doesn't know the stuff that I know in my head. And so you've got to know your audience and go, how do I help them understand why this is important? And so connecting with your audience is a very big part of storytelling. So founders have very particular stories, and these are the kinds of stories that are parts of every startup. There are the investor stories. How do you, and for each of these you have different goals and different perspectives that you want to, and again, this is about understanding your audience. Your investors are not the same audience as your employees. Your employees are not the same audience as your customer. And when I say stories for customers, that's marketing, that's sales. That's the stuff that you say in your business development conversations. And all of this requires knowing a little bit about them, knowing a little bit about their motivation, knowing a little bit about their mindset, knowing what they know, and how what they know is different from what you know. Because that's the other thing that people run into is they think that what they know is what everybody knows. And that's not always true. And coming from your own perspective and telling a story isn't as helpful as trying to figure out how do I sort of make it from their perspective. When you're bringing on job candidates, again, we talked about how do you get somebody to come and work for you, because whether it's a startup where I can't pay you a lot of money, or it's just, I really think you should come to this company and you know that this is a top-notch candidate who has options and can go anywhere they want. You need to tell the story that is going to be able to get them to want to come to you. And the media, press, PR, the stuff that we do all the time to sort of get mentions in the news. People think, well, I'm just going to call and tell this newspaper, I'm great, I'm fantastic, I'm fabulous. But you've got to tell a story, again, from a standpoint of the person you're talking to. So that person, that particular media, they have a particular audience. They have particular goals and objectives. They need to meet their motivation, so you need to tell the story from the standpoint that benefits them. So I said my goals were, the first one is why storytelling is important to founders. Again, it's important for startups in general, because the thing that's really particular about startups, more so than larger brands, is you're nobody yet. I mean, when you're starting up, people don't know who you are, they don't know whether to trust you, they don't know what you can do, they don't know if you're going to be around in 3 months, they don't know anything about you. And so everything that you do has to have a particular goal. And it's about sort of creating the brand. It's about creating confidence. It's about letting people know, yes, we'll be around for a while. Yes, even if we're not around, you're going to be taken care of. Yes, we've got the people to make sure that you are well supported if you're one of our customers. Yes, if you invest in us, we are going to do something good with your money. So these are the reasons stories are important. Within a company, the biggest story of all that's internal is what's the culture of the company? Who are we? What do we represent? Because that becomes part of your recruiting, that becomes part of the conversation and time side, that becomes part of helping everyone be aligned with a mission. Because you can't be aligned with here's what we are as a company, here's what we do, unless you understand and know the story of the company. And if everybody in the company has different stories, you're not going to have a very cohesive company. And so this is why stories are super important, more so I think in smaller companies that are just beginning to sort of create their own internal DNA than they are in bigger companies where you join and things are already established and known and all of those kinds of things. So how do you build a great story? Okay. There's a couple things you should think about, again, before you ever start putting pen to paper and start going, I'm going to write my script and I'm going to figure out what the story is and all that other stuff. Again, who is the story for? Who am I presenting to? Who am I talking to? If the story is for employees, you've got to figure out what are my goals specifically for when I'm done with this story. Is there What emotions do you want people to feel? Is this a story where you want people to feel sad? Do you want them to feel excited? Do you want them to feel confident in you? What do you want people to feel? And the reason you need to sort of map out what you want people to feel is because, and we'll talk about this later, you'll need to check when you sort of get around to writing your script, do I think that what I've got in there matches with the goals that I had? Did I put in the right stuff to get them excited? Did I put in the right stuff to sort of get them confident? Did I put in the right stuff to make them feel like, wow, I'm really glad I'm here? What do you want people to take away? You know, I in the beginning I said, you know, I told you, I want you to take away. Stories are important. I want you to take away that, that you're going to get some tactics today. I want you to take away that you're going to find out about some mistakes. I'm telling you what you want people to take away. I know what I want you to get out of this. You need to understand, when I'm telling the story, what is my goal in terms of what I want them to remember? What's important for them to know? Because brains are funny. Brains will sort of, everybody in this room, there's, I think, 24 people in this room, and if we ask people later what they remember, people will remember different things. And so the thing is, if you sort of put in too much stuff, you don't know who's going to remember what. You don't know if people are going to have the right takeaways. So what you want to do is you want to prune it down. Think of a good presentation, a good story, as sort of your favorite drink. Now think of everything that doesn't support your particular goals as being water that you're pouring into that drink. Okay, so the more you pour it in, the less it tastes like the thing that you wanted to be in the first place. On my Diet Coke, well, you know what? I was going to try having diluted Diet Coke just because I thought that would help, but doesn't work. Doesn't work. I'll just say no. And again, and part of the question is not just what you want people to take away, but how can you help them see and understand what you see? Because again, the thing that people tend not to think about is they get wrapped up in their own head. I know a bunch of stuff. And this is especially true of founders in startups, is they get really excited because they have all these ideas in their head. And but the thing is, they need to understand what I know isn't necessarily what you know. And so I've got to sort of look at that disconnect and go, how do I help you get to where I am? What information do I have to help you with that you don't have? For example, in that circumstance where I was talking about, founders that are pitching female products to male investors, they have to figure out, when I'm doing the presentation, how do I make it so that a male investor understands the magnitude of this problem, the severity of this, the way people feel when they're having these issues that they don't have. I see the same thing when I see, a lot of founders that are doing things for black hair salons, but to a white audience. It's the same thing. It's like, how do you go, this hair isn't your hair. Getting it taken care of isn't the same as you going to the barber for $20 or whatever, or going to a $200, especially if you're talking to rich investors. I'm not going to send you to a $400 salon and say, this is how you get your hair done. So you need to go, what's the difference between where I am and where you are, and how do I help you get to where I am? You had a question?
We could be interactive, but something that I'm thinking, and it makes so much sense, and they don't do it.
Okay.
Why don't the investors, who are completely mostly men, bring a woman in the audience, a woman they trust, their wife, their girlfriend? She would tell, if you told me you were an investor, you told me come over, I had something, I would tell you. But we just forget about that.
Okay, so that's an interesting point. But again, the problem is you don't control who's in the room. You control what you can control. You're telling the story. So trying to change the audience, that's not the answer. Right, that's you. That's like a comedian going, this is a wrong audience for me. Bring in somebody that can relate to the stuff that I do. And so that's not going to work. And so you have to be able to go, I know my audience. Okay. So you have to go, I know my audience, and I'm going to make sure that I'm doing what I need to do for that audience. So how do you craft the story? So again, start by writing down your goals. What are the things I want people to have as takeaways? What are the things I want them to remember? Make a list of what your audience needs to hear. Again, these are the things that sometimes it's just a checklist. For example, in investor pitches, there's sort of a list right now that most investors will have and say, we want to hear about problem solution, we want to hear about the ask, we want to hear about the market size. Write down a summary of your answers, which are, but don't do it sort of in a pitch deck. Do it on sort of Post-it notes or just on a whiteboard, so you can kind of get a sense of, here's the landscape of all the things that I have that I would put in my story. Determine your highlights. This is a really big one. People think that stories need to include everything. I'm going to put in 100% of my content in this story, cram it all in, tell them as much as I can. Again, people only remember certain parts, And so, think of it like the chorus of a song. The song, that part gets repeated over and over, and the rest is stuff that maybe we don't remember. So you know what? Figure out your highlights. And I'll talk about an example right after this. Then after you sort of know your highlights, create the skeleton. You want to make a flow. Here's where a lot of people fall down on presentations is the presentation jumps all over the place. Like people, this makes me mad. If you go online and people say, I want to figure out how to do an investor presentation, they have these templates that say, here's the 12 slides you should have in your presentation. And so people kind of go and say, oh, okay, I'm going to put in the 12 slides in the order that the template says I'm going to put in the 12 slides. And so they don't go, they don't think about which of these things are the things that are the best for me. Because the things that are the best highlights for me aren't necessarily the best highlights for every company. So it's the skeleton. Then again, figure out how you're going to connect with your audience. And we're going to go through an example in just a second. And then here's the big one, critically review the content against your story goals. So for example, if it's a pitch deck, we talked about the goal. The goal in this case, if you're doing a pitch deck, and it's going to be different for different stories, is you want to get an investor excited about your potential. And so you have to figure out, what does that mean? That means I have to sort of show them that I've got a good market. That means I've got to show them that they have confidence that I can execute. I've got to show them that there's traction, that there's some validation for what's going on. Make a list of all of those things, because you want to make sure that those things are included somehow in your story. What are the components? Again, answers to their specific questions. What are the things that when you're telling a story, someone's going to think of as a question? You should at least think about it so you have an answer or you include it in your story. You need to try and anticipate questions. And sometimes, if you do the story right, you can lead people to have the questions you want them to have rather than sort of the skeptical questions that they're going to have on their own. You got to know, by nature, people are skeptical. They go in, they want to support you, but if you leave them with an opportunity to kind of wonder whether or not you're for real or wonder whether or not you're telling them, they're going to start thinking sort of in the negative. So you've got to sort of go in armed with those questions. Your info, again, sort of just as you're going to look at all sort of your different pieces. So in this particular case, if you're doing a pitch deck, it's going to be like, let me look at my team, let me look. And now some of those parts for your particular startup are going to be stronger than others. You might have the world's greatest team. You know what, me and my co-founder have been doing this exact thing for the last 15 years. We've worked together 2 startups before. We've raised $5 million. You know what? That goes in a different place than for someone else who's got a deck where they just graduated college and they haven't worked together before and they don't know what they're doing. So don't necessarily look at templates and go, I'm going to put everything in the order that the templates say, because that doesn't make a compelling story. You want to make people go instantly, these people are credible. Again, your goals. I want them to feel credible. I want them to feel comfortable. So you figure out what are your highlights, your strengths. Focus on those, especially because you don't have time to put 100% of everything in every story. Connect with the audience. There's a couple different ways people do that. You will hear sometimes people will try and say, if I'm talking about something that you don't know, I'm going to relate it to something you do know. So I'll say, this is the Netflix for so-and-so. Or I'll say, I'm building the next Uber for so-and-so. Or I'm building an Amazon for so-and-so. The reason they do that is it's a way to kind of shortcut it, and it's a way for me to sort of translate what I'm thinking into something you know, so that now I can just sort of change it instead of having to describe the thing entirely from the beginning. And then the review. When you sort of do that, you're going to end up with way too much stuff, almost always. And you got to be, I put cut anything, but this is a real critical thing. You've got to kind of go in and say, ask for every piece. Is that a big deal? Is that important? Is that a part of the narrative? Does that support the story? Does that support the outcomes I'm looking for? The emotions, the knowledge, the takeaways, any of that stuff. And if it doesn't, it's got to go. Presentations, decks, stories, all of it. Think of it like Twitter. Twitter has done an amazing job of saying, if you're going to say something, say it in 120 characters. I love that. People don't do that enough. They put too much stuff. And so just take away stuff as much as you can so that you get to the part that's distilled, the drink that was in your glass before you started adding the water. But once you have a story, then it becomes, how do I sort of deliver the story? How do I deliver a story in a way that's going to sort of engage and connect with people? And part of it is frame the presentation. Tell people what you're going to do. Tell people at the beginning. Set the stage. If you tell them, I'm going to surprise and amaze you. I'm going to show you something that's different than you've ever seen before. I'm going to talk about why you should want to invest in my company. I'm going to tell you why this is the product you need to buy. Tell them that at the beginning, because it sort of gets them sort of in the right frame. It sets them up to sort of hear what it is that you're saying and sort of put it in the right context. Create anticipation. TV shows do this all the time. Notice at the end of every episode, it's sort of like the cliffhanger for the next episode. You know, if you do a story right, you can say, you know, at some point I'm going to tell you about this thing that's super important, fabulous, but I'll get back to that in a moment. People go, well, tell me about that now. And you can build anticipation sometimes, but either through pauses, sort of the way that you talk, sort of setting the stage for something and then creating a delay. But if you sort of create anticipation, you can draw people in and get their interest and use that to highlight specific important things that are part of the story that you want them to know and remember and understand. Modulate. One of the things that you don't want to do is you don't want to be one of these people that is talking at the same tone all the time and just sort of not tensioning. If you do that, you're dead. And people can't get a sense of what your emotion is. They don't know what you're highlighting. They don't know what's important. You can control a lot of the emphasis by how you speak and sort of where you put particular emphasis. You know, when you raise your voice, when you do sort of show emotion. And this is the thing, communicate your emotion. If I'm doing a presentation, I go, I'm really excited about this next piece. People will pay attention because they want to hear, why is he so excited about that next piece? So tell them, you know, or we were really frustrated because we started doing this thing a particular way. We weren't getting the kind of customer response we thought we were going to get, and so we were trying to figure out, after being frustrated for a while, we need to go out and talk to customers. It's okay to sort of show we were frustrated, but we changed the narrative. We went and did something that sort of made things a little bit better. Because with startups especially, things are going to go wrong. You can talk about when things go wrong because sometimes that shows when things go wrong, this is how we react. We don't just fold the tent and go home. Sound conversational. You don't want to necessarily sort of sound like you're just talking at people. You want to sound like, if I were in a bar, kind of having a conversation with you guys, this is how I would talk. You know, share something interesting. Sometimes it's nice to have sort of a fact or something in there that people didn't know. Like if you're doing like Warby Parker, you know, their presentation was, did you know that, you know, 80%, some number like 80% of the glasses market is owned by like 4 conglomerates. That's it. All the different glasses companies that you see out there are pretty much owned by the same guys. They're different brands, but it's under like 4 headings. And so that's why they said, here's why there's an opportunity for us to do something that hasn't been done before and be independent and break that market. Be earnest, be honest. You know, just don't fudge. You know, tell people stuff. If somebody asks you a question and you don't know, say you don't know. You know, don't sound like you're trying to be somebody different than who you really are. Your personality needs to come through, because one of the things that happens is, if I were doing a presentation and I tried to sound like some very formal super dude, the first thing you guys would go is, I don't believe anything he's saying, because that's clearly not him. People can tell when you're being yourself, and people can tell when you're not. For the content of the time, that's the one that I'm going to miss today. Avoid meaningless detours. I will often be in stories where people get distracted by sort of, you know, tangents, and they'll just keep going on and on about tangents. And again, if the tangent doesn't support the story, especially if you have sort of time constraints, then you go, there's 2 problems. One is you go over, and the other is because people will remember just a certain amount, it's like we have limited RAM. Everything that you add that's not part of the outcome that you want to achieve, you run the risk of that bumping out some other piece of vital information. It's the way we work. Again, okay. 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 So again, be yourself. Sorry.
I have a question. I watch a lot of startup pitches,
Okay.
and many of them bury the lead. Here's a great example.
Okay.
They have a partnership with Walmart, and they mention it at the very end. Do you think the lead should be in the beginning, or should they use it as part of anticipation if they have something really important to say?
You know, there's not a generic answer for that, but so the answer is you have to sort of, we talked about collecting all of your information. If they have a partnership with Walmart, that's the sort of thing where you need to sort of rank that and say, this is one of our highlights. This is a super strong piece that we need to do, and then sort of figure out where in the narrative that goes. If there's a part where you can build sort of this question in the mind of the investor that says, yeah, but can you pull it off? And yeah, because you can create this grand vision. I need to do this, and you can even say, and in order to do that effectively, you need to have channel partners and blah, 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 and sort of set the stage for the things that you need. And it's really great if you go, and you know, and one of the things that's really nice about us is we have this partnership already, and we have these things that you need, which is part of our competitive advantage. And so you can sort of set the stage for, this is something that you're gonna be thinking, well, when are you gonna get those things? And then you can drop it in. Some of those things you want to put at the beginning, some of those things you want to sort of make sure the story flows. But again, it's really important that you don't just sort of throw that out, because if you say, we have a partnership with Walmart, I don't understand in the beginning of the presentation why a partnership with Walmart makes sense. I don't understand what you do. I don't understand how that helps. So at a very minimum, you need to give enough background and context so that that now becomes a big deal when you tell me about it. Okay, so integrity, again, just people can tell when you're being truthful. People can tell when you're sort of schmoozing them, when you're sounding too polished, when you sound like a slick salesperson or whatever. So you don't want to do that. People will shut down. People will turn off if they think that you're being disingenuous. They want to know that the person that they're talking to is a real person, and you can have conversations with them. And they want to, because that helps them have faith that everything you're telling them is true. So if you're an honest person who's being yourself, they're not going to worry, I wonder if all of this is BS. I wonder if any of this stuff works. Part of that authenticity helps you create confidence in what you're saying, and confidence in credibility for you in general. Again, focused, engaging. When you're telling stories, make sure to sort of look at the audience. If you're in a huge room, sort of look out at the audience. You don't want to be looking all the time at your slides. You don't want to be sort of distracted by something else. You don't want to be checking your notes. You want to talk to somebody just the way that you would talk to them in real life. And when you're talking to people, you're making eye contact. You're sort of looking them in the eye, and it's the same thing you do. And so those are some of the tactics for being. It's understanding your audience and making sure that you make the information easy for them to access. If they come from a different mindset or a different frame than you, for example, male investors for female products, or white investors for black products, or people, some very small niche, let's say you're doing investors for teenage products, it's the same thing. Find a way to help make sure that those people have some context to understand what it is that's important about that to that group, and don't always assume that what you know is what the person that you're talking to knows. Make sure that you don't get sort of, make sure that you make sure that the story flows. You don't want to just go, item 1, here's what you do. Item 2, here's what you, item 1 should connect to item 2. Item 2 should connect to item 3. So that when you're telling something, even if it's a pitch, it doesn't have to necessarily go in the order of the templates. And if you have something important to say, again, you want to say it, but you need to lead up to it. You need to make sure that people have the context for it. So for example, with that Walmart situation, again, the Walmart thing could be a big deal, but it's not necessarily a big deal unless I understand why it's a big deal. So you need to say, how do I make sure that by the time I get to that, people understand why this is important? If I'm telling you about a thing that I'm going to do to fix email, I need to make sure that I've talked about why email is broken and why it's a problem in the first place. If I want to sort of wow you with the fact that I've got the world's greatest team, I've got to sort of talk about some of the technical complexity or some of the stuff that's going on here, so that when I tell you that, it becomes part of my advantage. If I'm talking about the culture of a company, I want to sort of tell the story in a way that just doesn't sound like I'm going, we're all nice here. You want to sort of include the pieces that are going to make it relevant, make it sort of meaningful to people, and all of that. So one of the things that I see as mistakes, and I see a lot of mistakes, and this is the thing, that most of them are really easy to fix. Trying to sound too smart. The way that manifests 90% of the time is founders think that it's time to go dig out their SAT review books and find all the big words that they can find and use those words in a presentation. Because for some reason, people think if I use 4 and 5 syllable words, people will think I'm really smart. But for anybody here who took the SATs, you're probably thinking, wow, why am I doing this? I'm never going to use any of these words in real conversation. And the fact of the matter is, if you're out at a bar, if you're out at a party, you're not talking in sort of big words. And the other thing is, what people do when they're trying to sound smart is they use jargon. They use sort of things to make them sound like insiders. Like, I've got this machine learning, AI, big data, blockchain. People will throw in crap just because they want to make it sound a certain way. And the thing is, don't use terms that have nothing to do with what you're doing just to try and sound different. People, again, they want to connect with you as a founder. You know, you hear the expression, angel investors especially, they don't invest in companies, they invest in teams, they invest in people. So you know what, if I came out here and, I know a lot of big words. I almost never use them. Because when you use big words, a couple things happen. Somebody in the audience doesn't understand it. They don't want to seem like the stupid person, so they're not going to ask you what it means. There's part of your story that got lost because they didn't understand that thing that you said, and they're never going to tell you, and it's going to sort of just make part of that presentation lost for them. If you just talk to people the way you talk to people. You'll notice that in the course of this presentation, I don't think I've used any words that were super big, and that's just because that's not how I speak. And again, if I did it, you would sort of be able to tell this guy's not on the level. Too many details. People, oh my God, people in presentation, again, they put in everything. It's like, let me put in the whole kitchen sink. I need to put in, and here's where I was born, and here's where I grew up, and I went to college here, and I did this. If it doesn't support the narrative, if it doesn't support the outcomes that you're trying to get, leave it out, cut it. Pretend again, it's a Twitter tweet. You just want to lose that stuff. Complicated graphics. This is where people fall down. They want to put up matrices, and they want to put up pie charts, and they want to, and the problem is, when I see presentations where I have to try and figure out what is that graphic telling me, that's a problem. Assume for almost anything you put up that people need to be able to interpret what you're trying to tell them in the first 3 to 5 seconds. If I have to look at the axes and figure out what that means, and if it's going up to the right, is that a good thing or a bad thing, don't put it in. You do want to use images, if you can, in presentations, but you don't want to use images that people don't get right away. They have to just sort of scream, this is what I want you to take away from this image. Hype, exaggeration, and untruths. Oh my God, this is a big one. When you hear people say things that, this sort of falls into that category. We have no competition. This is a big problem for me when I hear that, because I go, you know what? Here's the thing, and again, you don't know what people know. If I'm an investor, guess what? I'm seeing 20, 30 presentations a month. And I probably saw 2 of them this month that were your direct competitors. So when you get up there and say, oh, I don't have any competition, I go, okay, my BS meter goes off. Part of what happens is your credibility is just sunk to 0. Everything you say from that moment on kind of goes through a filter and says, I don't really believe you, and I sort of don't have faith in you. And the reality is, if I see 100 deals and I invest in 1, and you've got a little bit of credibility, integrity issue going because of that, you're not going to make sort of the 1% that I'm going to kind of pursue and invest in. People will say things like, we'll be 100x more effective than the other guys that are sort of out there. Let me go back to this one. Okay.
So I was at the Airbnb LA Open a couple years back, and it's interesting you mentioned that because that was the last big marketing event before the slow ramp down to the IPO. And can you hear me still? Anyway, so Brian Chesky was on stage, and I remember being his, how would you say, he dissolved in front of me because he said there's so many billion homes in the world, as if that was his total market potential.
Right. Okay, see, that's another thing that people do, is they try to be impressive. They're sort of like trying to be too smart. They'll try to be impressive, and they'll throw out numbers that, again, don't connect to the story that they're telling. One of the things that happens is, let's say, for example, someone is a real estate broker and they make 3%, or marketplaces, good example. Marketplaces where they'll make 5% on every transaction that happens in the marketplace. And then they tell you the value of all the transactions that happen in the world. The gross, and they say gross transaction value is $46 trillion, which is great, but they're making a percentage of that. So their market isn't this trillions of dollars, it's a percentage of that. And again, for investors, we see a lot of that kind of stuff. And so that sort of goes into a filter that says, that sounds a little bit not credible. And when you do things like that, it doesn't work. Now, that being said, and sort of there's a negative side, there are people that are magnificent storytellers and can kind of sort of say things that aren't necessarily believable, but just get you so engaged and so excited. If any of you are following sort of the whole WeWork thing that's going on at the moment, Adam Newman, magnificent storyteller. I mean, and this is the fact. He was able to kind of go in and create this great, story about we're not just a co-working space. We are this ecosystem. We are this tech company. And just by sort of being able to somehow position it as a tech company, you go from sort of being a 2 times multiple to being a 10 times multiple. Glorious. So you can tell stories. If you're credible and you're a great storyteller, sometimes you can get away with that stuff. But again, most. Okay, I was gonna say, and especially most startups, they're building their reputation. They're building their integrity. So when you do things like that early on, you start to get a reputation, and then people will sort of go, I do or I don't believe what's coming out of your mouth. And so it's super, super important that you don't sort of try and mislead, because things like that sound like you're trying to mislead. If you give me a market that's not really your market, it's like you're trying to sort of make me think that that's your market, and that rubs people the wrong way.
Well, it did look at Airbnb dramatically, because they had to, after that attempt, they were kicked out of Spain and Amsterdam, and have had to, regulation just attack them.
Well, there's a lot of things that are sort of involved in that, but yes, the story gets to be part of that. Speaking too fast. Again, one of the things that I see a lot of people do is they, especially for founders that are doing sort of their investor pitches, especially the ones that have the 3-minute pitches. They feel like, okay, 3 minutes, I'm supposed to tell you my market, my this, my that. I've got a lot of things, I can't do that in 3 minutes. And so they think if I talk incredibly fast, then that'll help me kind of make it all happen. The reality is, you should think of sort of short speaking opportunities like the trailers for movies. In a movie trailer, you've got between 2 minutes and 3 minutes to sort of say, here's all the exciting reasons why you should go see a movie. You don't have to show the whole movie. You just say, here's a thing that's going to get you really excited about it. And so you have to be really very careful about just saying, here's enough information that I can speak at sort of a normal speed and a normal tone, because that's how people hear and people listen and people engage. And filter. Instead of saying a lot too fast, say less, at sort of a normal speed. Okay. See, I don't know how to make this thing go backwards. This is the problem for me. It would be great if I knew how to make this thing go backwards. I got to figure that out. Cocky is a big one for founders. I have had, when you tell a story, and being cocky goes up there also with sort of being unbelievable. You don't want to tell people things that just aren't credible. I've had people go, you know what, we've got this startup, right now in the Silicon Valley, people that are really good at AI are getting paid $1 million salaries because it's really incredibly difficult to do AI. But we have a startup that lets you go online and you just tell it what you wanted to do and it writes all the complex AI code for you in like 5 minutes. That's not believable. And when you say something like that, there's alarm bells that go off in people's heads that just say, I don't believe you. And like Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos, yes. And so the thing is, you have to be really careful about people. People feel like, because we don't have a reputation, because we don't have history, we have to sort of pretend that we're bigger than we are. We have to sort of have this bigger scale. We have to have these bigger ambitions. Big ambitions are great, but keep it honest, keep it real. Sort of saying things that if somebody looks behind the curtain even a little bit, prove to absolutely be untrue. Your story is going to be your personal story is going to be you're the person that can't be trusted. Your personal story becomes the person who isn't credible and isn't believable and who doesn't say things that you should rely on. And part of it is the more you can create sort of this notion that I tell stories that people can rely on, the more your stories just sort of, it makes it easier. You have to spend less time defending yourself, less time sort of trying to give your history, because people just go, when this guy gets on stage, I believe everything he says or she says. I love Seth. I went to school with Seth. So, but Seth, he gets it. And his whole thing about sort of permission and integrity and, you've got to go in and sort of, part of your brand is about how you present yourself, how you tell your stories and all of that. And then the other thing is again, trendy, jargony. Oh my God. Every now, there was just a study out recently that said that, I think it was done in the UK, that 40% of startups that had AI in their name or their presentation actually weren't using AI. This is one of those things where people are like, what's the new thing? Blockchain. I got to use blockchain. I saw the other, somebody was putting it together a dating site, and they said, oh, we use blockchain and as part of our dating site. And what they didn't know is one of the investors was doing a lot of stuff in blockchain, and they said, tell me how you're using blockchain exactly to make this dating site. So what's the value add of using blockchain in this dating site? And the CEO was doing the presentation and actually said, you know what, I'm not the technical person on the team. You'd have to talk to them. I just know that it makes it much better. And so jargon for the sake of jargon, big words for the sake of big words, sort of numbers for the sake of numbers, things that aren't credible, all of those things are things that you should just go, those aren't benefits. I'm not bamboozling anybody. People that tell stories that include those things think they're pulling something off on people. And you might occasionally pull something off on people, but a lot of the times when it's really important, you're not only gonna not pull something off, but you're gonna hurt your brand, you're gonna hurt your credibility, you're gonna hurt your integrity, and you're gonna hurt your ability to communicate effectively to that person or that audience again and ever again. So that's it. Why storytelling is important, tactics to help you build a better story and help you avoid common mistakes. Now, the one thing I'm going to say is, that's important about stories is if it's a story that you're going to tell often, you have to understand that a story is sort of a living thing, meaning that, the story you tell on day one is going to evolve. You're going to get feedback, you're going to get different opinions, you're going to get sort of input from other people, and you're going to change that story a little bit. And so the story is going to evolve until you feel like you've got it right. And it feels right. People will ask, if I'm telling a story, do I read a script? Do you sort of have to memorize the whole thing? I think that what you want to do when you're telling a story is you want to understand, again, sort of what are the points you want to hit, what are the outcomes you want to get. But I don't think you necessarily want to read a script. And again, it becomes that authenticity thing. It's really hard, especially for long presentations, to read a script and sound like it's coming from you. Unless you're a professional actor, it's one of those things that's very difficult. You want to talk sort of from the heart, but you want to make sure that you hit the high notes. And so I don't think you necessarily need a script. I think you just kind of, again, you sort of go from the things that you want to hit. And before I go, and just one more thing, I'm just going to say really fast, weirdly. So this egg, I was going to say, is sort of like, I was thinking when I was putting this together, this egg is sort of like a story. When I was in high school, and I'm only telling you this because it's sort of a visual representation. I knew that my mom wanted something for Mother's Day. And I knew, again, knowing your audience, I knew that my mom had this huge egg collection. She collected eggs wherever she went. Like some people collect travel globes. So I knew that I needed to know, I knew my audience. She loved eggs. And I had sort of this thing in shop class where I said, okay, I'm going to put together something for my mom, and I need to put together an egg. So I had to gather all my pieces. And what they didn't have is they didn't have sort of a big round piece of plastic. I was taking plastic shop. They had sheets of plastic. So this is like sort of all the components of the story. What are the sort of the outcomes that you want to get? What are the pieces that you want to include? And so I took a bunch of pieces of sheet plastic and I stuck them all together with like super Bondo glue, and I just sort of stacked them on. And then I said, okay, what are the parts that don't support the outcome, which is an egg? So because what I had was then a little cube of sort of this, stacked together plastic. And so then I would sort of start sanding it. First with a power sander, taking out all the big bits that you don't need. And you're like, okay, that's crap, I don't need that. And then after a while, it was sort of share it with people and sort of talk about it and sort of look at it, compare it to other eggs. And at some point I go, okay, now I'm getting to sort of the refined points, the parts that are sort of at the end. And it was one of those things where I would just sand it every day for about a month until I ended up with this. And this is a result of sort of those sheets of plastic that I put together. And because I knew my audience and because I left all the stuff out that wasn't meaningful in terms of, this is what I gave her, and I got it back, unfortunately, when she died. But I just use it as an example of, it's going to take time to get your story right. But again, if you sort of know what your outcome is, if you know sort of the pieces that you want, if you know who you're giving it to and how they're going to appreciate it, you're going to end up with a pretty good story. Questions?
I agree with you about practicing. I was a trial lawyer for 20 years, and one thing I always tell people is you have to practice. You have 1 minute in a courtroom. That's the example I always use to convince a judge of something very important. You have to practice, practice, practice. And can you give examples of how people should practice? Because I think I always like actors do this on talk shows, right? They sound like they're spontaneous, but it's completely rehearsed.
Well, okay, so the question was, how should you practice? There's a couple things. I think you always want to practice with somebody else. You want to have sort of a fill-in audience, and the reason you want to have a fill-in audience is, again, sort of the outcomes that you want to achieve, and you don't necessarily want somebody who's coming from the same mindset as you. So you don't necessarily want another lawyer, because another lawyer might depends on the context, but you want somebody who's going to be sort of as unindoctrinated as your audience. And then after you do the presentation a couple times, you want to ask them, what did you remember? What did you take away? What questions came up? What were your concerns? What were your doubts? What were the things that didn't seem credible? Because what you're looking for, sort of like the egg, is what are the parts that I need to sand away? What are the parts that I need to sort of replace? And doing it by yourself, like if you're just in a mirror or if you're just recording yourself, it's like your term paper in college. You can't find typos in your own term paper because it's all from your head. You need an outside perspective to be really critical and say, that's not helpful, or I didn't believe you when you said this part, or I missed the part why it was important that you were going to do this in your go-to-market strategy. So it's very important, I think, to just practice with other people, and then don't take the feedback negatively. What I hear a lot from founders is, I did this thing to somebody and they just didn't get it. And they do the presentation again and say, oh, they just didn't get it. And they think that it's because the person they're doing the presentation to is dumb. The fact of the matter is the presentation is not the right presentation if the person didn't get it. And so when you start seeing that, start being open to critical feedback and saying, how should I adjust that to sort of change so that people do get it? Any other questions?
What would you say is a takeaway for us after seeing this story about creating stories?
Highlights are sort of based on the things that I think people get wrong most of the time. So the biggest things that people can do today to improve their stories is, A, ask themselves, what do they know that their audience doesn't know? And am I doing a good job of helping you to sort of get into the story, get into the shoes of the person that is sort of the protagonist in this story? Again, sometimes people will do that with analogies. Sometimes people will do that with case studies. And one of the things that you'll see a lot is if I'm doing Steve Jobs, the example with Steve Jobs and the iPod. Rather than talking about the product, he sort of made it something that was accessible by talking about, here's your own personal life experiences, here's how music influences you. So he wasn't selling a device, he was selling music in your pocket. So find a way to connect with people in a way that's meaningful to them. Try to avoid just giving information. Don't just give away data and information. Say, you know what, in your circumstance, you need to sort of understand and see something that's going on. So for any story that you're telling, the other thing is, I would say, understand and know what the outcomes are that you're trying to achieve. How do you want them to feel? Do you want them to feel confident in you? Do you want them to feel excited about an opportunity? Do you want them to feel, like there's a sense of anticipation, like, oh my God, I can't wait for this thing to happen? And then go back and look at your story and ask yourself, am I accomplishing these things? Am I hitting those particular emotional notes? And because if I'm not, then I have to go back and say, I want them to feel this way, and if I'm telling the story and they're not feeling that way, then I need to do something else about the story.
So is it fair to say that knowing your audience is the most important thing?
I'd say knowing your audience. Okay, so yes, I'd say knowing your audience is probably one of the most important things, because I think that's a thing I see people get wrong a lot. I see people in, the real high level version of this is, people say when you're trying to raise money, if you're raising seed money, don't go to a Series A investor. If your message doesn't resonate with your audience, then you need to change the message. It's sort of like, and audiences are different. Have you ever gone to a movie with a friend and you loved the movie and they hated it? Two different perspectives, two different things, same content. So if someone were trying to get to you, they'd want to do it one way, and if they were trying to get to your friend, they'd do it a different way. You will change the story, and the impact on the audience will be hugely different if you make the story fit better with your audience than if you just tell the story from your perspective. There's generally sort of, for startups, there's generally sort of three perspectives. There's sort of the company perspective, there's the investor perspective, and there's the customer perspective. And people think those are the same thing. I see a lot of times people will do sort of one presentation to this, and it's the same to everybody. This is what's great about our company, our product, and that's what they use for customers, that's what they use for their business development, that's what they use for investors. That's not the thing. The fact is those three audiences are very different and have very different motivations. The company cares about, how are we sort of making sales and are we building a profitable business? Investors are caring about, is this sustainable? Is this a large market? Customers don't care about either of those things. Customers are like, how does this affect me? Does this toothpaste make my teeth whiter? Does this shampoo make my hair? Does this tool make me more productive? So if you don't understand at least the motivations of your audience, you don't know how to sort of motivate them. So I think that's probably the most important thing.
I'd like to give Tony a quick round of applause. Thank you so much for all your time. We did live stream this today, and I can send that out to everybody that was here. I know you have a hard stop in a few minutes, but if people want to stick around and try and ask Tony some questions.
And I'm happy to share the slides if yeah.
And we have some food left over as well.
I'll send you the slides. And,
Yeah, that would
okay.
be perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
As long as you RSVP, see you later.
Right. If you didn't RSVP to the event, no.
Then come check.